Alright, today I'm going to tie a stimulator. This is a super popular pattern, been around for a long time, Randall Kauffmann pattern. And I'm going to tie this. I don't tie mine on a 200R. I don't like the bend shape of a 200R, so I tie mine on a 5212, Tiemco 5212, which is a 2 extra long, 1 extra fine dry fly hook. So it's just 2 eye lengths longer than standard. And I'm going to use some Fluorescent Fire Orange 70 denier UTC Ultra thread. And I'm going to start this thread right about 50-50 on the hook. And I'm going to come all the way back to the bend. Just making a nice smooth thread base. Back to about even where the thread hangs, even with the point on the barb. Now at this point I'm going to build a nub of thread. And I want this nub of thread to go from this point here, at the end of that thread base, back. So back here on the bend part of the hook. The front of this nub should be right where the thread is hanging, and it shouldn't go any further in front of that. So I'm going to spin my thread up a bit, and I'm going to start to build that nub. And you can see you've got to kind of work back and forth to build a football-shaped nub. And it seems to work best if you keep your thread pretty short here, close to your bobbin tube. That'll give you good control. And if your thread starts to spread out, don't be afraid to twist it up and quarter it up into a bit more of a rope. So I want that little nub about like so. Now the tail is going to be yearling elk, and yearling elk is just very fine tipped elk hair. It's not as coarse as bull or cow elk. And it's going to flare nicely in place here. So I'm going to cut a clump off the hide, and then I'm going to pull all that under fur out. So I get a nice clean clump. Nice bunch of tips there. I'll take and put that in my medium-sized stacker, and you can see I get a nice clean stack out of that bunch. And then once I've got it stacked, I can kind of get a little better idea of how much hair I have there and how much hair I want. So I'm going to thin that down just a bit. And then I always finish up in the small stacker. So the small stacker is just going to bundle this hair into a little tighter clump. Like so. You can see that's a nice neat little bundle. So I'll take that out of the stacker. And now I'm going to take that clump of hair and I'm going to measure it against the gap of the hook. So it's a pretty short, stubby little tail. Now I'll butt that in my fingers, and I'm going to spin my thread up here. It's been flattening out while I was stacking the hair, so I want to spin it up into a cord. I'm going to lay my pre-measured spot, and I'm going to put 2 turns around the hair. And I'm going to tighten the thread toward me, and you can see those butt ends will flare as I start to do that. So I'm going to keep tension on the thread all the way around and build a band of thread that travels forward. So that first wrap was right at the base of that nub, and then I've just made a band of thread about an eye length long going forward from that point. So then I've got a short little brush tail there. Now I'm going to lift all these butt ends up. I'm going to bring my thread back up to where I started. I'm actually a little behind 50-50 there. And then I'll lay it back down, and I'm going to hold it in my thread hand out here over the hook eye. I'll take a couple turns around it and then tighten the thread toward me. And what that does is lets that hair encompass the hook shank, so the hook shank is centered in that bunch. And I'll come in and trim all these butt ends out. Usually top and bottom cuts, so that I've got those little stubs. Now I'm going to just spiral wrap back to the base of the tail. And when I get back here, I'm going to hold on. If I turn this a bit, you can see how I've got just a tiny bit of space between the nub and the butt ends of the hair there. And I want to push that hair right up against that nub of thread. So I'm going to again keep my thread real short here and work 1 turn behind the other. I'm holding onto the tail to keep it on top of the hook. And just wrap back over that to shove that tail right up against that nub. And then I've got it anchored in place. So it gives us a little bit more width back there. Spreads that tail out a bit, and that'll help support the bend of the hook. Alright, now I'm going to take a length of fine copper wire, And with my thread hanging back here at the bend, I'm going to bump it back here. I'm going to lay that piece of wire in so that the stub end doesn't come any further forward than the butt ends of the hair there. So just a little bit behind those butt ends. And I'm going to capture it at the bend and wrap forward over it to anchor it in place. So it's back here at the bend. I'll just clip that in my material spring so it's out of the way for the moment. And we're going to tie a yellow stimulator. So I'm going to use some yellow Antron dubbing. And Antron dubbing is a long fiber, slick dubbing. It is a little difficult to work with because it's so slippery. But I'm going to take a relatively small clump. We've got most of our bulk already built on the hook here from the elk hair underbody. So it's not going to take a ton of dubbing. I want to twist this dubbing down really as tightly as I can on the thread. Antron being slick doesn't dub down near as tight as superfine dubbing, but superfine dubbing doesn't come in these nice bright colors. So I'm going to use my bare thread between my dubbing and my hook to spiral back and get my first turn of yellow dubbing back here at the base of the tail, and then I'm going to work forward from there up to but not off the end of those butt ends. You can see how I stopped just short there. And then I can jump my thread. I'm going to add just a touch more there. You can see that that body, although I didn't really do much to taper it, came out tapered, and that's because the natural butt ends of the elk hair are tapered. Just want to cover that last little bit. And now I'm going to come all the way forward to the hook eye and back again to the front edge of the body. Snug my thread right up tight. Now for the body hackle, this is a brown saddle feather, and when I size it around the hook, you can see it's just about a hook gap width. Put it back here by the bend. Maybe just a skosh more than the hook gap. And that's about what I want on this. So I'm going to trim the butt end off that feather, and I'm going to strip some of the butt so I've got an exposed stem. I'm going to tie this feather in with the inside of the curve toward the hook, right up against the front edge of the body, and you can see I've got some bare stem beyond the tie down here. I'm going to pick this feather up and I'm going to start to spiral wrap it, or palmer wrap it, back over the abdomen, all the way back to the bend of the hook. Now when I get there, I'm going to pick up my wire and catch that tip. So I just made a turn there. And the trick on wrapping your wire forward through a palmered hackle is really just to act like the hackle's not there. Just wrap the wire as you normally would, and it will feed nicely through the hackle without binding things down. Right up to the front, tie that off with a couple turns, break that piece of wire out, and then I always trim the feather tip out. I don't break it off. Like so. Now we're going to put our wing in. There's a couple little tricks on the wing for a stimulator. And I like to use a fairly heavy wing, so the same hair, that yearling elk that we used for the tail. And I'm going to clean it out, get all the underfur out. And it's a little heavier clump than what we used for the tail. I'm going to take and put this in my medium stacker because it is a bigger clump of hair. Tap it up a few times. And get those tips nice and square. I see a couple of broken tips in there. I'm going to get rid of those. Thin the clump down just a bit, and then I'll restack it one more time. Like so. So now I've got a nice clean stack. I'm going to bump my thread right up to the front edge of the abdomen here. And the wing length on a stimulator, you've got a little room for interpretation. You can go all the way to the end of the tail or to the base of the tail. Typically on mine, if I'm tying a bigger fly, say a size 8 or bigger, I'll go all the way to the end of the tail. Those bigger flies are a little harder to float, and having a little additional hair on there doesn't hurt. On a smaller fly, just to keep the fly profile small, I'll go to the base of the tail. This is a size 10, so I think I'll just go maybe to the base of the tail here. I'm going to stack this up one more time. I've just fiddled with it enough. So I'm going to take this clump of hair, I'm going to get my measurement on it, just to the base of the tail. I'm going to pinch it in place along with the hook shank in my fingertips. And I'm going to spin my thread up just a bit. That round thread that's been spun up a bit will bite into the hair a little better. And I'm going to put 2 turns around the hair. Now I'm going to tighten those thread wraps toward me to start to crease that hair down. And you can see those butt ends will start to flare. Now I can't crease all that hair down with just those 3 turns because those butt ends are much thicker diameter. So what I'm going to do is keep my tension on my thread all the way around the hook. I'm going to start to work forward in small increments through those butt ends, and you can see them stand up and flare up as I wrap. And I want to stop well short of the hook eye when I get there. Give you an idea of where our hook eye is here. And we've got those butt ends spread all the way around the hook, so we've got them anchored, distributed around the hook rather than all in a pile. So now I'm going to lift all this hair up on top and come in with the tips of my scissors and cut that. And then the bottom cut, I'm going to push my thread up out of my way and sweep those hairs down. And again with the tips, come in and trim those butt ends out. Now you can see we've got a bit of a taper built in there, and that was the whole idea of cutting those butt ends that way. It's also centered the hook shank on that hair, or centered the hair on the hook shank, so we don't have the wing all tied in on top. Now I'm going to smooth some of these butt ends out. I'm not really trying to cover them, but I do want to smooth them up. And then I'm going to lift the wing, and I want to make sure that there's no space. You can see there actually is a little bit of space between where I tied that wing in and the front edge of the body. So what I'm going to do is hold on to that wing, and just like we did on the tail, put one turn behind the other to jam that wing right up against the front edge of the body. Flare everything in place. Now I'm going to take a Grizzly hackle, and again this is a saddle feather, and I'm going to measure it so it's at least as big as the brown feather that we started with. I'm going to strip some of the base of the stem, so I've got exposed stem, and I'm going to tie this in right at the front edge of the wing, right up to the base of the wing, and again I've got a bit of exposed stem beyond that tie down there, with the inside of the feather toward the hook. Now I'm going to dub the thorax, and it's not going to take much dubbing here because we've got a lot of the bulk already built in from the underbody, the butt ends of the elk hair that we put to use there. So I'm going to take some fire orange Antron. I'm going to dub this down again as tightly as I can. And I'm going to start this orange dubbing just up here behind my index point, so about 1 eye length back from the hook eye. And I'm going to dub up the hill. We've got a tapered base there, and anytime we have a tapered base that we want to dub over, I always want to dub from the front to the back. So up the hill, right up to the base of the wing. Then I'll tighten that dubbing up a bit. And you can see we've still got a taper there on that front end. What I want to do is square that off a bit. So with this last bit of dubbing, I'm just going to square up the front end of that thorax and end with bare thread behind the hook eye. We'll never get that completely square because we've got to come back down to the hook eye, but you can see how we've squared that off, blocked that off a bit. Now I'm going to pick up my hackle feather, and I'll make the first turn here right at the base of the wing, and then spiral forward through that dubbing right up to the eye of the hook. When I get there, I'm going to hold the feather almost upright, take the thread straight up and straight down for 2 or 3 turns. Come in and trim that feather out. You can see I've got a few hackle fibers that didn't play along, so I'll just get rid of those. Again, very tips of my scissors. I'm going to sweep everything back and build. It's actually a fairly prominent thread head up here. I like this thread head to match the nub at the bend of the hook. Like so. Then I'll come in and whip finish right over the top. Trim my thread out. preen everything back in place where it needs to go. And there's our finished yellow stimulator. Really a very buoyant fly, lots of surface area, that big bushy hackle. This is a great dry dropper fly. It's intimidating to look at because it seems so complicated, but it's really just the same steps that you'd use on, say, an Elk Hair Caddis, just twice on the same hook. I'm going to hit this with just a thin coat of Solares Ultra Thin here for that thread head. Cook that down with my lamp. I'm not sure if you can see that right there on those hackle fibers right there where I've got some of that Solares. Once it's cooked, it peels right off, so very easy. And there's our finished stimulator. Proportions are very important. The amount of hair is very important. Those are all things that you got to watch out for as you tie this fly. But the end result is pretty darn fun fly to tie and to fish. Grab you some hooks, get to work. I hope you enjoy it. We'll be back with more soon.